Alright, hey guys, welcome to the fourth part of Chapter 4. So we're going to take a look in this video at the digestive system and then how it works. Okay, so let's jump into it. Okay, the human digestive system. The digestive system is the main system that is involved in the breakdown and absorption of nutrients that you get from your food. And that process of digestion is actually kind of outlined in four main steps. Yeah, the first one you've got is your ingestion, which is when you actually eat the food. You digest the food, is when you break it down into smaller pieces, you absorb it into the blood, and then you egest, or egestion is when you basically get rid of it, the pooping, okay? So it contains a complex series of organs that perform these functions. Now these organs you guys have been most likely already familiar with throughout your high school life, but we're just going to go through them in a bit more detail. Here's an outline. Yeah, the digestive system, you've got kind of your main gastrointestinal tract. Now that is the main tube that food travels through in your body. Yeah, it starts at the mouth, it works its way through the esophagus, through the stomach, into the small intestine, and then into the large intestine, into the rectum, and then out the anus. Okay. Now, in addition to that, the digestive system also has a series of accessory organs, which is the other stuff that also assists in the process of digestion. But food doesn't necessarily go into those organs or goes through the organs at all. Yeah. So you've got your tongue, which assists in the movement of food. Your salivary glands, pancreas, spleen, liver, and gallbladder, and all of these aid in the digestion process by secreting the enzymes and other substances into your main organs, and that helps with the digestive process. Okay, so let's start with the mouth, the oral cavity. The mouth is responsible for physically breaking down the food. We call this mechanical or physical digestion, and it is done through your teeth. You chew your food to break it into smaller pieces, and the main purpose of that is really just to increase the surface area of the food, and it squashes it up and makes it really soft. Yeah, you've got a whole structure for this. You've got your lower jaw and your upper jaw both have incisors in the middle, which is for tearing of food. You've got your premolars, and then you've got your molars, which is for the grinding of food. Yeah, they're flat and they kind of grind and break the food up into smaller pieces. Also in the mouth, you've got salivary glands. Now the salivary glands secrete enzymes that lubricate and break down the food. Now these enzymes work in a different process from physical digestion. Or mechanical digestion. They do chemical digestion. They use enzymes to break down food, and that is what chemical digestion is. It is the use of enzymes to change the sort of chemical structure of the food and break it down into smaller pieces. Okay, the enzymes are primarily designed to break down your sugars, which is why in your mouth, you typically, the enzymes in there are used mainly to break down the sugars that you sort of eat. And once the food is ready, you swallow it, and then it goes down into your esophagus. Now we call the food a bolus, which is the technical term for it. And there's a little flap called the epiglottis, which prevents food from going down into your larynx. Yeah, which is where your lungs are. Okay. Now as it goes down your esophagus, it is pushed down by a series of muscular contractions, and that process is called peristalsis, and then it just basically it pushes the food along. Now peristalsis also is what allows you to swallow food, even when it goes against the kind of the movement of gravity. For example, when you're upside down or lying down, you can still swallow food because it's the muscle contractions that push food. And then also in the case of when you need to vomit, it also pushes the food back up. Yeah. Now the stomach. Between the esophagus and the stomach is what we call the esophageal sphincter. Now the sphincter, a sphincter, is a ring of muscles that actually, when contract, tighten and forms a seal. Yeah, and so the esophageal sphincter is what separates your esophagus from your stomach. Yeah, it keeps food. It closes to keep food in the stomach, and at this point there is a bit of return, which is when you vomit. But largely once it gets into the stomach, we don't normally bring it back out. The stomach contains vital chemical digestion of food. Now, in particular, the stomach is in charge of digesting your proteins and your meats. Yeah, and so the stomach is an organ, a muscular organ that's designed to churn the food and secrete all of these acids in there to break down that protein or that meat. Yeah. It secretes what we call a gastric acid. Now, gastric acid is kind of like a bit of a cocktail of different acids and enzymes and things like that, which are involved in the breakdown process of it. Yeah, the hydrochloric acid is one of the main components, which has a pH of sitting around about 1 or 2. Potassium and sodium chloride, and then also there are protein digestive enzymes and bicarbonate. Now, a lot of people think that the hydrochloric acid is what breaks down the food into your kind of mushy chyme, but that's actually not true. The hydrochloric acid brings the pH all the way down to 2, and to some degree it does kind of break down a bit of the food chemically, but the main reason for that is because your protein digestive enzymes only function at a pH of 2, which is why the hydrochloric acid brings the pH level down so that the enzymes can then function and work to break down the food even more. The enzymes are far more effective at breaking down the food than the hydrochloric acid or the potassium and sodium chloride is. Okay. In addition to that, there's also a certain amount of bicarbonate as well, which is another chemical, and what it does is the bicarbonate buffers and prevents the stomach from becoming too acidic. If it becomes too acidic, the stomach will begin digesting itself. Okay. So whilst in the stomach, the bolus gets turned and churned kind of back and forth until it becomes this kind of liquidy stuff called chyme. And the chyme has the same kind of texture and color that you would normally kind of expect to have when you vomit, yeah, which is what happens when you eat something foul and the stomach pushes it back out and up the esophagus, and that's what you're seeing. You're seeing your chyme, and which is also in that particular instance, that chyme is highly acidic, which is why it's when people kind of vomit, they also find that the teeth have this kind of gritty kind of textural feeling, because what happens is the acid is actually burning off the enamel on the teeth, which is why when you sort of you're hangover and you vomit, you should actually brush your teeth, or you should actually drink something to clean out all of that acid, because it's not good for your teeth actually. Yeah. Now, one of the key problems that the stomach kind of initially faces with this is that it is a protein digesting organ, but the stomach itself, as with all organs, are also made of proteins. And so it runs the risk of these enzymes potentially digesting the stomach itself. And so what happens is the lining of the stomach contains a layer of mucus, and that mucus is what allows the buffer of the pH to stop the enzymes from actually breaking or digesting the stomach itself. Right? And so what happens is when that mucus layer is kind of eroded away or broken away, then you tend to get the stomach digesting itself, and that's where you get stomach ulcers from, where you kind of get damage to your own stomach. Now, typical digestion time in the stomach is about 4 hours, which, if you kind of remember, is kind of the average time between meals when you get hungry, because your stomach is the primary organ that kind of like stimulates that kind of that feeling of hunger. Because when the stomach is empty, it growls, and then your body kind of stimulates for you to go ahead and eat more food. Okay. All right. Between the stomach and the small intestine is what we call the pyloric sphincter. If I'm just going to go back 1 second, the pyloric sphincter is right about here, and food in the stomach will not pass into the intestine until it has reached a small enough or a fine enough consistency that allows it to pass. Okay. And so the pyloric sphincter closes and keep the food in the intestine. Now, at this point, once food passes in there, it is the point of no return. It won't go back in the stomach, but it has to go out basically the other way. And so the small intestine is the vital chemical digestion of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. Yeah, you'll notice that proteins were digested in the stomach. A certain amount will be digested in the small intestine as well, but it also mainly digests fats and carbohydrates. It is also the longest and also the largest surface area of all of your organs, and it, on average, is about 7 meters or so long and has about 3 centimeters in diameter. And the digestive time in your small intestine also sits at about about 4 hours roughly as well. Okay. Now, your small intestine is composed of 3 main sections. Yeah, the first one is called the duodenum, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in the next slide. But it basically brings the pH back up. Remember that the chyme coming in from the stomach is sitting at about pH of about 1 or 2, and is highly acidic. And so the duodenum can't do the same things that the stomach does, and so it needs to bring the pH back up to a 7 or 8 so they can function as per normal. Okay, and it also receives enzymes from the pancreas and the gallbladder, and then does some digestion there. And then the jejunum and the ileum is where the absorption of nutrients begins to happen. So now that it's broken down fine enough, they can then be absorbed. Okay, so the connection there between the stomach is there. The pyloric sphincter, you can sort of see that little gap there. The duodenum is about there, and then you've got the jejunum and the ileum, which is the rest of the way. That little kind of funny J-looking or U-looking shape there is a duodenum, right? And when food reaches into the duodenum, there's a connection between the duodenum and the liver, and so the liver produces this chemical called bile, and it sends it to the gallbladder, and the gallbladder stores the bile and releases it into the duodenum. Now, bile is a yellow to brown fluid that breaks down your lipids and your fats. It's like an emulsifier, kind of like soap, if you think about it kind of way. An emulsifier will break up fat molecules because it has one hydrophilic side and one hydrophobic side, and so it breaks up the fats and latches it to make it into a water-soluble compound. And then what happens is that then makes it available for enzymes to start breaking down. Yeah, and so your pancreas will also make and release digestive enzymes to break down more carbohydrates and more proteins. And so you can sort of see that the duodenum kind of does the kind of all-purpose thing, and the chyme here has to go back up to a pH of 7 to 8.5. And to do that, in the duodenum, sodium bicarbonate is released in there as well to bring the pH level back up to a neutral kind of state, rather than keeping it at an acidic state. Okay, and then from there, once it moves into the jejunum and the ileum, you get a little bit more chemical digestion, but you now begin to see the absorption of nutrients. Yeah, the jejunum and the ileum has a really long length. In fact, it's the majority of the small intestine, and it has a really high surface area. So right now, you're getting to the place where it wants to absorb as much of the goodness that you're getting from your food as possible. And so inside the small intestine, it is lined with a kind of little components called villi or villi, and then each villi will have even smaller components called microvilli, right? And so what it looks like is that if you kind of open up the flaps, you get these folds, and each of these folds are the villi, and then the villi have more folds on them, which is called the microvilli, which is kind of extensions of the cells that line along the small intestine. Now, that's the nucleus there, and that's your mitochondria, etc., etc., and then you got your microvilli right there. Now, what this allows the small intestine to do is that food now, if you can imagine this being the food, and this is the villi, and that's the stomach, the small intestine environment there, the food, the nutrients, your glucose, your proteins, your fats, all of your organic molecules are now passing through by diffusion and active transport past the intestinal cells and then into your bloodstream. Yeah, and so the bloodstream passes through, collects all of these nutrients, and then it goes and leaves, and then it gets directed around the rest of the body where it gets used up, right? And so there you begin to see the absorption of nutrients happen. Once it passes through the small intestine, it moves into the large intestine, and the large intestine is where the food sits for most of the time. Yeah, the large intestine is responsible for the absorption of water and the chyme, from the chyme, sorry. And it basically is what turns your chyme into poo, yeah, because it solidifies it, takes all the water out, and it becomes this hard, crusty brown stuff that obviously you dump, right? It's not as long as the small intestine. It's about 1.5 meters, but it's wider, which is why it's called the large intestine, 5 to 8 centimeters in diameter, and the digestive time here is a whopping 16 hours, right? Because as you get into here, it travels at a very slow rate to get rid of all the water from the food. Once it finishes, it sends the food into the rectum, where it sits there until it's ready to be excreted. During that time, you get rid of it through the anus or the anal sphincter, which is the muscular ring that is your anus. Okay. Now, there's a little organ off the side of the large intestine called the appendix, which is a little storehouse of bacteria and things that you've got in your gut that allows you to digest the stuff that you digest. Because there's bacteria living in your gut that allows you to break down some of the plant material, matter, cellulose stuff that you kind of eat. And so sometimes I think what they used to believe was that the organ was once believed to be quite useless, vestigial, and if you got rid of your appendix, nothing really sort of happened. And that's to an extent kind of true, but they recently found that it kind of acts as a bit of a storehouse for your kind of reserve bacteria. If there is a virus or something that causes you to clear out all the bacteria in your gut, then the appendix can then recolonize that bacteria and allow it to grow again. Yeah. So that's your digestive system kind of in a bit of a nutshell there. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and we'll catch you guys next time.